Hello and welcome to LeftWord Books. So wherever in the world you are, if you're in India, very good morning to you. If you're in North America, then a good evening to you. If you're somewhere else in the world, then whatever time, good night or whatever it is. I'm very pleased. My name is Sudhanva Deshpande. I work at LeftWord Books. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you today uh, for this online launch of a book that is very close to our hearts. And the reason why I say that is because uh, this is a book that's been, in one sense, long in the making, although it didn't take all that long to actually make the book. Why I say it's been long in the making is because Aijaz Ahmad has been associated with LeftWord Books right from the very beginning, and he's been part of the editorial advisory board of LeftWord Books when we began, and Aijaz Ahmad's work has really helped an entire generation, or in fact, more than a generation, of people on the left in particular, to think about the world. So, in that sense, when Vijay Prashad in his introduction says that it's impossible for me to think without thinking alongside the work of Aijaz Ahmad, it's in that sense that I say that this is a book that we have thought about, um, we've talked about for a very long time before we approached Ajaz Ahmad with a formal request to make it happen. Um, Both for Vijay and myself, Ajaz Ahmad's work has been really some of the most significant work that we've read that has helped us to make sense of the world in one sense. Last year, Maloishri Hashmi, myself, and Vijay Prashad, the three of us went to the US and we spent 4 days with Ajaz Ahmad at his house, enjoying his hospitality, the wonderful food that was served to us, and also this great conversation. For 3.5 days, actually, Vijay engaged Ajaz in this conversation, which has now been edited and put together as this book. Nothing human is alien to me. Before I invite the first speaker of the day, Comrade Prakash Karat, I'd like all of us to hold up a copy of the book because this is really the virtual launch of this book. We are very pleased. The book is available on leftword.com. If you go to or mayday.leftword.com, and you can purchase it there. We are happy to ship it all over the world. There's also an e-version of the book available. I can see that many of our readers also have a copy of the book, and that's fantastic. And they're also holding it up. So very pleased about that. Thank you so much. I don't think the speakers today really, genuinely need any introduction. But I will say this, that both Prakash and Subhashini, Prakash Karat and Subhashini Ali, are better known as Politburo members of the CPIM, longtime communist activists, Marxist intellectuals, and so on. But for us at LeftWord, there's a different connection as well. And that's the capacity in which I'm going to introduce the two of them today. They're both directors of Naya Rasta Publishers Private Limited, which is the company that owns LeftWord Books, the imprint, as well as Vam Prakashan. So without any further ado, it's over to Prakash to speak about this book, about his association with Ajaz, and so on. Thank you. If the rest of if those who are attending only, not speaking, could turn off their videos, please. Thank you.
Friends, it gives me great pleasure to be here today at the release of Nothing Human is Alien to Me, a book of conversations with Aijaz Ahmad by Vijay Prashad. And I would first of all like to congratulate Vijay, Sudhanva, and Maloishri for going all the way to California to meet Aijaz and to produce this brilliant book. it is a scintillating overview of Aijaz's thought and writings. It is also a book which I think will give to readers in a very distilled and considered form the essence of what has been the theoretical work of Aijaz Ahmad and its practical implications. Since there are so many questions and issues which will arise out of this book, and maybe even contestations, I cannot go into all that. I would like to briefly say what I think is valuable in this book, what I found most interesting for those of us who are involved in the left movement, those of us who are Marxists. You see, Aijaz was the person who helped many of us to decipher and get a clarity about what happened in the post-Soviet Union world, the ideological and political fallout of that demise of the Soviet Union, and the various regressive currents which emerged worldwide in the post-1991 era. Before that, Aijaz had also helped many of us with his critique of what is known as Western Marxism. And in the post-Soviet Union era, especially when Western Marxism seemed to be the only version of Marxism which seemed to be alive and relevant, Aijaz could, with his background of being part of the anti-imperialist, anti-colonial world, part of what is known as the third world currents, where imperialism, the question of nationalism, all this mattered. His Marxist approach and standpoint clarified many of the things which were confusing when there was this welter of currents flowing out of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and to look into the transformation which took place, the rise of neoliberalism, what he calls extreme capitalism, the rise of ethno-nationalisms, and accompanying reactionary ideologies, and also the whole question of how the left and the Marxists should deal with this world where imperialism had become dominant again and extreme capitalism became the norm in most parts of the world. So I think that the writings of Aijaz in this period, and in that the introduction he wrote for us in theory, which coincided exactly the time when the Soviet Union had collapsed and this new era or world had begun, was a highly perceptive framework in which we could position our understanding and work out our strategy and tactics. I cannot go into all the other things, but the other thing which Aijaz has, which is clearly coming out in this book, is how he helped us to understand all the barrage of post-Marxist theories which came in this period. He remarks that most of this post-Marxism is actually pre-Marxism and traces its roots to the right-wing or counter-reformation, counter-enlightenment theories and trends which emerged in the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe. So Aijaz has been literally a guide to how to understand through Marxist dialectics this major transformation, which was actually a regression in the post-1991 era. But coming to India, I think is more relevant for us today. Aijaz has been writing about the period, again, in the post-1991 period in India. And there, the three major ideas, secularism, communalism, and nationalism, all three in the context of the major global changes that took place and its impact in India, the rise of neoliberalism in India, the rise of Hindutva, communalism, and the greater integration or alliance with imperialism by the ruling classes of our country. I think the writings which began from on the ruins of Ayodhya, Aijaz grappled with all these concepts. I think on secularism, he has stated in this book also, in the conversation, that in India, we have our own peculiar definition and practice of secularism. That is, it is equality of all religions, equal treatment of all religions, which we in our party program say that it is actually boils down to the right for all religions to equally interfere in the affairs of the state. And this has laid the basis for the advance of majoritarian communalism in our country. The second aspect, which is communalism, I think Aijaz has done some, made an important contribution by pointing out that communalism in India is not something which is foreign to the body politic. It is not some external intrusion into the body politic. It is very much rooted within our historically, politically, socially rooted in our structures of society. And to see it as something affecting some part of the body politic and something which can be cauterized is not actually understanding the nature of the problem or the issue. And I think that Aijaz provides a very important correction to the left liberal sort of narrative that exists about how India emerged after independence with the adoption of the constitution, Republican constitution, as a secular democratic republic. You see. Without looking at the serious flaws and defects in this whole construct. I think that many of us have also accepted this dominant sort of narrative about how India became a modern secular democratic republic. And it is necessary to re-examine many of these postulates that we have held very dearly. Because without making that critical analysis, we will not be able to face the current situation. And here, Aijaz has been also talking about what has been happening in India currently in his more recent essays, where you have a qualitative change after 2014 with the Lok Sabha election and the Modi regime coming into office and then getting re-elected with a bigger majority in 2019. Because what has happened, as he has pointed out, is, which is very, again, very useful for us, is that it is not necessary for the RSS and the Hindutva forces to dismantle the existing constitutional setup. They can work within the constitution, within the constitutional bodies, within the parliamentary democratic system, and transform it. The form will remain, but the content will change. I think many people in India have underestimated or are underestimating the transformation which is already taking place. Hindutva has become the hegemonic idea which prevails, and it is seeping into every institution of the state and instruments of state power. And you can have a republic, just like there is an Islamic republic in Iran and various other republics. In India, you can have a Hindu republic which maintains all the trappings and forms of the state power that was established in India in 1947 and 1950. So here comes the question. The third point, which Aijaz has dealt with, and which is the most promising area which we must explore, which is nationalism. Aijaz has never been part of that Western Marxist or left tradition which sees nationalism per se as an evil phenomenon or as a disruptive phenomenon. Nationalism, he has a Leninist approach to the national issue, question and nationalism, and he's seen how nationalism can become a progressive force in the fight for national independence, national liberation. And he has made this point. I think it is there in the his article on communalism in the Marxist, and subsequently his essays on nationalism, that nationalism is not a particular of a particular variety of class direction. Nationalism can be occupied by a particular power block, alliance of classes, and taken in a direction they wanted to take. So today in India, I think the biggest challenge faced by the left and the Marxists is that you have Hindutva nationalism, which is becoming the mainstream nationalism in our country. We cannot avoid looking at it in any other way. Looking at it in any other way would be underestimating it. It is becoming the common sense of the people. This nationalism is very difficult to counter. All our experience of the last 6 years shows that this Hindutva nationalism or Hindu nationalism has struck deep chord among the common people, even among the peasantry in North India. We saw this in the 2019 election, how the Balakot and anti-Pakistan rhetoric fed into this nationalist appeal. But it's not just that particular incident. We see all through in the 6 years, there is this pan-Hindu nationalism, which has become the biggest political mobilizer and appeal for the RSS BJP. How to counter this? This is a very difficult question. I know that Aijaz has also touched upon some of these issues, how this nationalism, along with extreme capitalism, neoliberal policies, and the social structures of oppression in our society, all of them are interconnected. And we have to wage a struggle against all these three forces, and of course, imperialism, which is directly now integrated or linked with the ruling classes. But how to construct a grammar of nationalism, which is secular, anti-imperialist, and at the same time, which has a popular appeal. This is a very difficult thing. We have not yet come to terms of how to do it. We're grappling with it. But I think the writings of Aijaz on nationalism and the nationalism in an era where there is extreme capitalism and imperialism is dominant, I think they will help us take the steps forward towards challenging the Hindutva nationalism, which has become such a powerful and dangerous phenomenon in our country. I think I've taken much more time than I should have. I've been given 15 minutes. So I would like to only conclude by saying that I think Aijaz has made very clear in these conversations that for him, Marxism is not something to be discussed and theorized in the academia. It is to be related to the development of a revolutionary movement, a movement for social transformation, for liberation from oppression. With that perspective, the writings of and the thought of Aijaz Ahmad in the present situation in India is going to be of great help and value for our struggle in the coming days ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prakash. Before I invite Subhashini Ali to speak, I'd just like to say that, this book is also special for me because one of the things about Aijaz Ahmad's writings has been that no matter what he writes on, even when he writes on subjects that are, quite obtruse sometimes, postmodernism and so on and so forth, people like me who have no academic training in these areas still find that there's something that we can hold on to, something that gives us an in into very complex ideas and theories. So for me in particular, I think it's been really important that Aijaz Ahmad has been one of those Marxist intellectuals who have thought a great deal about how to communicate, how to write, how to communicate, how to write prose that will reach out and make itself intelligible to large numbers of people. In academic writing, as we all know, sometimes there's this tendency to, in fact, do the opposite, to try and make yourself as unintelligible as possible, so that people think that you're saying something very deep, which you might be. I don't know. I just don't understand some of it. This is something that you can never accuse Aijaz Ahmad of doing. His writing has always been very lucid. The prose has been always beautiful to read. It's a joy to read Aijaz Ahmad. And I do want to say that when you read this book, you'll find that his spoken prose, his speech is also just as lucid. And I do want to congratulate Vijay in particular for editing the transcript, which was already a fantastic transcript. I was there, when the interviews were being recorded, and then of course I read the whole transcript myself. But then Vijay worked on it, and the text of the book that has now come to us is really quite beautiful to read. It's very accessible. It's something that speaks to us, and it combines in a beautiful way the enough of a sense of Aijaz Ahmad's own, personal background in a sense, not his personal life in that sense, but his background, where he comes from, where do these ideas come from, etc., and his role as a public intellectual. With this, I'd like to invite Subhashini Ali, who, as I said, as you all know, is a well-known activist of the women's movement, of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, but also for us, a director and a guide, I should say, at LeftWord Books and Ram Prakashan. Over to you, Subhashini. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me to this, I think, very, very significant event. And agree with most of what Prakash said, all of what he said. So I don't want to repeat any of that. And anyway, what I was going to speak about is actually quite different from what Prakash spoke. So I think that's probably a good thing. Maybe not as well, anyway, let me say what I have to. First of all, I'd like to say that this is really a very significant book. Ajaz's writings over the years, of course, have been read and appreciated and castigated and so on. But to see his thought process in a way in which the development of the whole thought process, and he uses this wonderful word conjunctural, that a Marxist uses Marxist methodology to address current problems in a way that is not pragmatic, but in a way that is dialectical, and that is the way Marxism should be used. I think that's something that is very significant in what he writes, and seeing it together in one flow is a wonderful experience. And I'm very happy that LeftWord was able to bring out this book. From last night, I've been pestering everybody I speak to that it has to be translated into Hindi. I know Tamil, Malayalam, and all will definitely come. But for Hindi, we have to make that effort, and it must be done. And in a way, it's a real tribute to Ajaz, because though he didn't start writing ever in Hindi, but he wrote Urdu for the working class of Pakistan. That is what he has said. Why is Sudhanva saying today I can understand what he says? That is because he, as a Marxist, wanted to write for people for whom this would be important in their struggles. So he started writing in Urdu for the working class of Pakistan. And I think that probably approach and that way of writing has persisted, which is why all of us are able to understand much of what he writes. Because, but still, there are abstruse parts, and I'm not denying the importance of his very profound academic knowledge also. So I'm not going to speak at all about his what should I say, his kind of rapier thrusts against all the posts, which are fantastic. I would just say that what Terry Eagleton wrote in the as a blurb for In Theory is what I think all of us say, that he was there, fighting almost a lone battle sometimes for Marxism when it wasn't fashionable to be doing so, and he had to be noticed, and he had to be taken seriously because of the huge intellectual power that he brings to his writings and the huge knowledge that he brings. So I don't want to speak about that. But one of the points that Prakash spoke about, and which I find so significant in this book, is his own understanding of fascisms. And I think this is very important, because too often we in India also try to keep saying, oh, Munje went to meet Mussolini, and, they got the shots from the Nazis. But that's not really what is important. Each brand of fascism or each brand of fascistic politics is very particular to the country and to the society from where it emerges. And this is something that is very important in, I think, Ajaz's writings. And if we don't pay attention to this, we are not going to even be able to begin to combat the variety that we are now facing in our own country. And so it's very interesting that he has also talked not only about Gramsci and Italy, but he's talked about how certain vacuums have been filled by the religious right in societies which are very backward. And India still has a lot of space in our own country which is extremely backward, where there's this huge religious attachment to religious ritual and dogma, and where, as conditions of life become worse, the attraction of religion and its certainties actually increase. And that is so helpful to, whether it is political Islam, or whether it is even Goldwater, I believe, or Nixon. I think Nixon, he says, was the first person in America on the right to take advantage of the religious right in America. And so this whole attachment that people have, and in times of stress, this attachment becomes so much greater. This feeling of security that religion is able to give becomes even greater, and how that is used by the right. And that is why he's written, it's very interesting, that for the communists to be the only force to be opposing the RSS in India, it's so much more difficult, because the uh, communists don't have any of those arrows in their quiver, the arrows of religion, the arrows of tradition, etc., etc. And so it's a difficult battle. But I think that point of how such a kind of fascism develops in backward countries where there's not the kind of advanced capitalism or advanced corporatization that Italy and Germany had, that's very interesting. And the examples he gives are so make the whole thing so real. The bus ride that he took from Istanbul to Anatolia to go to the mazar of Rumi, by the way, I find that very interesting. But that bus ride in which he could see the classes, not only the poor peasantry and the oppressed, but also the emerging, mercantile classes in small Mofasal towns, how they would naturally be the allies of this kind of religious right. That's very interesting, because we have similar formations in our own country. And when we talk about intermediate castes and all that, we do it in a more theoretical way. We don't really actually go to find out who are these people. Like he says, who were those people who were standing on top of the mosque and breaking it? Who are they? Where are they coming from? What classes do they belong to? What class does the RSS represent? I think these are very important questions that we haven't really worked enough on. And that is what we need to do in our own country, in India, to confront this huge challenge that we are now seeing, growing exponentially. And in this, I think the point he makes is that don't depend on any allies. I think that's a very important point, because this kind of religious fascism, which also is obviously supported by the entire corporate class, it has its appeal for all the other so-called opposition parties, whom we sometimes call secular parties or regional parties. But most of them also are uh, are Hindu in their belief, and they are therefore not going to participate in this battle. They will participate in it to serve their to save their own political bailiwicks, to save their own political existence. But ideologically, they are not going to be on the same page as us, because they don't have that ideological opposition. That was so clear when the recent Ram Janmabhoomi judgment came, and how parties competed with each other to be the first to welcome it. I think our party was the first to come out in People's Democracy with a very stringent and a very clear opposition to that judgment. Nobody else has done it. So we have to also understand the nature of the battle that we are fighting, that these political allies who may be with us for some time, for some period, but for very different reasons, we cannot rely on them actually in this very bitter battle, and nobody understands that better than the RSS itself. I mean, I cannot emphasize enough that the RSS has no illusions. They were ready to support Mrs. Gandhi at some point, as long as she came along with them on some parts of the agenda. Same thing with Rajiv Gandhi. They have no problem in having alliances with all these parties. It doesn't matter what kind of criticisms these parties have made of them. They know that somewhere there is a bottom line where they are all on the same page. And I think that is something we have not really taken into account with the seriousness that it deserves. They know it, and we somehow are still fostering the illusion कि ये हमारे साथ रहेंगे और वो हमारे साथ रहेंगे, और these people are really very committed in their fight against RSS. Actually, none of the bourgeois opposition parties are. That is actually the fact of the matter, which does not preclude adjustments, alliances, and so on and so forth in the short run, but without the illusion that they are going to be with us when the bitter struggles, you know, when the struggle is really joined, the ultimate. And here I would like to say that what I found, I must say, extremely interesting is that Ajaz has also given us certain pointers that it's, yeah, it is a difficult struggle. You are alone politically, but there are other social formations and other forms of social oppression that, if you actually oppose in the right way, can create a much bigger support base for the left. And here I think what he says about Ambedkar is extremely significant. And that point that he makes, that he wonders that if the CPI at the time of Ambedkar had clearly said that, it is a priority to fight caste in India, and caste is like part of the primary identity of Indians, that sort of formulation had been made, would Ambedkar's attitude towards the left and his whole uh, reliance on constitutional methods to try and do away with the caste, would uh, that dependence have been much less? Well, anyway, that's something in the past, but that doesn't mean that we cannot think of many of these issues now. And here it's really very interesting. I hope I can find this. He said two very interesting things. One is about this whole feeling that, Hinduism is a very tolerant religion, and, there's scope in it for so many different kinds of belief. And here he says, beliefs can be elastic as long as caste boundaries are rigid. I think that's an extremely important point for us to remember, and us to understand how important actually caste and the rigidity of caste and varnashram dharma itself is to the structure, to the real structure of Hinduism, which is Brahminism. And that is something I think that we should become much more aware of, and much more when we are planning our strategies and so on, we have to keep that in mind much more. And here it's very interesting. On page 127 of this book, there's a whole piece on how how it is the battle of the communists, taking on the RSS is the battle of the communists, and what a difficult battle that is. And he appreciates many of the initiatives of the communists and the left, which have not been talked about much. And here he suddenly, in the middle of this, there's this sentence. Uh, it is really quite impressive how well Brahminism has survived millennia of challenges to the caste system. I think this is a very important sentence. I was wondering why it came at that time. And it struck me, Ajaz is not going to agree maybe, but it struck me that it's like a clue that you find for a treasure hunt, that this is something that we have to understand. That what is Hindutva? And when we say Hinduism is different, Hindutva is different, because Hindutva is a political strategy. It is a political aim, political objective. But Brahminism is also tremendously political. There is nothing apolitical about Brahminism. Brahminism is a political structure which has been built and strengthened and preserved over centuries to preserve a certain kind of hierarchy which should have been obsolete a long time ago, but it is still there. And it is still a very, as he says, how well Brahminism has survived millennia of challenges to the caste system. And here what he writes is very interesting. I really, it resonates. He says, of course, we talk about the communalism of the RSS, and we have to talk about it. We have to fight against it, and the left has been doing it most uncompromisingly. It is the communists who've been doing it. That's correct. But then he says something which I find extremely interesting, and which I really am coming to agree with more and more. He says, total concentration on the communal question tends to objectively suppress the question of violence against Dalits, against women, against Adivasis. And I think this is a very important point, because Prakash, when he was speaking in a different way, talked about the fact that though we have a Republican constitution and so much, so on and so forth, but the basic structures, social structures of repression in our society, which have also been taken over by class oppression, they are very much intact. And they are not intact only in the minds of RSS people, they are intact within society. And it is these structures which lend a lot of strength to the whole Hindutva project, but can also prove to be, these same structures can prove to be those pillars that can be shaken and can be broken actually, so that this project disintegrates. So I think this understanding of Indian society and the structures of Indian society is going to be extremely important for us in our fight in the coming days. And that doesn't mean that I'm one of those who says that, caste is the primary feature of Indian society, class doesn't matter. That's not true. That is not true. I certainly don't accept that. I certainly see the strength that the RSS or and the Sangh Parivar today derives from the total support that they get from the corporate sector, which sees them as the best bet to protect their own class interests, and also the fact that imperialist powers are also using this opportunity through their ties with this government to intervene directly into, more and more into our markets, etc., etc. So I have no questions about the validity of those concepts, but at the same time, the underpinnings of social structures by Varnashram Dharma and the effort that is being made to preserve these structures by the Sangh Parivar should also be taken very seriously by us. And here I have certain differences, maybe of degree, with what Prakash has said and also Ajaz has said, that the constitutional structures do not need to be destroyed. They can be actually subverted by using them, by getting your people inside them and using them for your purposes. I think that theoretically that sounds correct, but I think that the plan of the Sangh Parivar, especially the RSS, goes beyond it, and they really have never accepted the Constitution of India. From 1950 onwards, they have never accepted the Constitution of India. They have always said that they want it replaced by something that is truly Indian, that is the Manusmriti. And recently, they are more open about this. And I would just like to say that it's very significant that at the Bhumi Pujan of the Ram Mandir, which many people saw, and I think correctly, as sort of the laying of the foundation stone of the Hindu Rashtra, and it was done on the 5th of August. Again, a very significant date, the date when the whole character of Jammu and Kashmir, etc., was changed, and so on and so forth. So, 5th of August is an important date. That was the date chosen for the Bhumi Pujan of the Ram Mandir on the ruins of the Babri Masjid. And what is very, very interesting is that on that occasion, Mohan Bhagwat, the RSS Sar Sanchalak, he made a speech, etc., but he quoted or he recited only one shloka. And that was a shloka taken from the Manusmriti. And that shloka says that and all citizens of this great nation, this race, must accept Brahmins as their teachers and their guides. Now, they don't just pull something out of somewhere without without thinking it through. This was an important choice of a shloka. It was a very important choice of a text, and it was a very important choice of an event at which this particular shloka was recited. So I think that this feeling that constitutional structures will remain as they are, I have my doubts, and certainly even if just maybe the some dhacha, some kind of structure remains, but the whole of it has been hollowed out and replaced with something quite different. I think that also gives us a certain space to fight for some of the ideals of the constitution, like equality, like caste equality, economic equality, gender equality, which of course are all threatened, whether or not the constitution itself is replaced or whether these structures are destroyed completely or not. I think that many of these concepts are certainly under attack. So that does give us a space to combat the RSS on a different ground, which is not the ground of its choosing. When we're talking about nationalism and the kind of nationalism that we believe in, this all inclusive nationalism, that's true. But at the same time, when we also look at who are the recruits of the RSS, who are the sections of society that are being recruited in large numbers to support their project, then it also becomes apparent that many of these sections are actually not as much aware of the fact that they are going to be the worst sufferers under that project. And that is what we need to do, is to make these sections aware of the threats to them by this kind of Hindu Rashtra that is being constructed, which according to Manuvadi principles. I think that that is something also that our campaigns and uh, our attacks are actually not using enough. I think we have to use that much more, because otherwise, what happens is that yes, we have big movements, we have big strikes. The Kisans are on the streets, the workers are going on strike. But what happens is that very often, and I've seen this, and I'm going to end here, is that when supposing a mill closes or a factory closes and workers go back to their village, they actually go back to their caste identities, and their whole class identity becomes a sort of a distant dream that yes, that was there, but now this is real India. I'm back here, and it's again the caste identity that is overarching and most important. So this aspect of even the nature of the working class in India, which BTR actually used to speak a lot about, and his classes used to speak a lot about it also, that is something that we have to keep in mind. Finally, I'd like to say that Ajaz says something very interesting about Gramsci, and he said that Gramsci really tried to understand where Italian fascism was drawing its strength from. And so he would try to understand what are, ordinary people reading, what are they thinking. And this reading just brought home to me something that is so shocking. Day before yesterday, in this very district of Kanpur, there was a terrible, terrible, abominable murder of a 6-year-old child. And that child's heart was taken out and it was eaten by a childless couple because they had bought a book near the railway station which told them that if they ate the heart of a child on the Diwali night, they would be able to have a child. So, this is very important. We don't know enough about what people are reading, what ordinary people are, what kind of knowledge they are accessing. And so therefore in this whole interview, there's one thing I felt was missed, was the whole role of media, and especially I mean the electronic media, in actually creating um, a huge cultural, I don't know what to call it, weapon, a whole culture, which is actually the culture of Hindutva, the glorification of Hindu Rashtra, the glorification of some, early period that never existed. But this role of the electronic media, I think, is also something that is just very, very important. And really, we don't have much to counter it with, but we have to understand what it is doing to people's ways of thinking, what people read, what people see, how it is affecting their whole understanding of the world around them, how it is making them understand the roots of their own oppression, maybe in a complete false way, false consciousness being created in a way that we had not even thought possible, etc. But that is also a very important aspect. And I think that I am just about now getting out of time, so I won't take any more of your time, except to say that this book must be read and this book must be translated into Hindi. And as Ajaz said, there are a lot of translation that used to be done in the Soviet Union, nobody could understand. So he himself translated what is to be done. So we have to be very careful, because the Soviet Union also took Sanskrit scholars to the Soviet Union to translate texts into Hindi, and they are quite incomprehensible. So we did a right thing by translating the manifesto, and now we have to translate this book too. Maybe with Ejaz's permission, we'll edit it and make it maybe perhaps a little shorter and a little more focused. But it is absolutely the most riveting uh, book and it's a learning experience. And I just cannot say enough about it, and enough about the necessity of every person who considers himself or herself a communist to read it in some language or the other. Thank you, Ajaz. Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Sudhanva. Thank you, everybody, for making this book possible.
Thank you so much, Subhashini. When we had the interview and when the editing process was going on and so on, Vijay and I were also speaking about the cover design of the book and how to go about that and so on. I know that Ajaz has strong views on covers. He has strong views on most things, including cover designs. And I've been the recipient of some of those sharp views in the past. But then Vijay and I decided that we are going to reach out across the globe on the other side of the planet. Because how else do you speak about the work of Aijaz Ahmad, which is really at its core internationalist in the best sense of the term? And so therefore we requested a Cuban artist to design the cover. And I'm very pleased at this. I don't know how much you can see. I'm very pleased at the design that she made. This is an artist by the name of Greta Acosta Reyes. And I hope that Aijaz Ahmad likes the cover. And with this, over to Aijaz. आप म्यूटेड हैं.
Right, I had muted myself. Thank you very much. I'll start with the cover. Actually, Vijay sent me 3 covers made by the same artist, this comrade from Cuba. And I immediately fell for the most militant one of them, because there is an energy that goes upward towards the hammer and sickle at the top with these, and the figure at the top seems to have a turban on his head. So it seems to be some Sardar comrade who may have drifted into Cuba or something. Something of that sort. Well, so I greatly like it, but it's true that I have some strong views about covers and, as you said, about most things in life. I want to thank both Prakash and Subhashini very much for their comments, for their comments really of solidarity, I should say. And the problem for me now is that, except for one thing that Subhashini said, everything is, I mean, there were no critical remarks to which I could really respond. These were the one slight reservation that Subhashini expressed. I'll take that up. But let me actually begin by saying that the existence of this book, actually the book as it is much more the work of Vijay than of mine. Vijay and Sudhanva may have been talking among themselves, but the person who actually read, even presented the idea of the book to me was Vijay. For a year or so, I sort of said yes, maybe, etc. The idea comes from him. The title comes from him. He selected the title, which I greatly appreciated. It's a wonderful title, but I must tell you, this is not my title, it's Vijay's title. The shape of the book, the book has taken the shape that it has taken by the line of questioning from Vijay. The kind of questions that he asked, the way he formulated the nature of the interview and so on. And then, of course, the editing of the manuscript and so on. So the book really belongs a lot more. If the line of questioning had been different, what I said in response would have been different. So it really is, in many respects, shaped by Vijay. And Sudhanbha and Molashri, I was so impressed and really quite stumped by the fact that they sat through 3.5 days listening to all this and just suffered it all in silence. You know, it's quite a feat to sit through 3.5 hours of other people talking, and you just sit there and so on. So I was very, very, very impressed. And again, in the production of the book, of course, Sudhanbha has done a lot, which has been invisible to me, but I imagine, but I know how much he must have worked on it. I myself don't have that much to say about the book. It is a certain kind of, some shades of intellectual autobiography. As I said, by the shape of it comes very much from the way Vijay actually approached this. Throughout the interview, I was very impressed by how closely he had read so much of my writing, virtually everything I have published in English. My Urdu writings, I know no longer, very little of my Urdu writings I now have with me. Most of it has been lost anyway. But he read virtually everything I have written in English, very systematically, and then shaped the interview according to that. Both Prakash and Subhashini have raised a number of questions, a number of issues that are very central to the book. I don't want to go over any of that. The one thing that Subhashini did raise about the constitutional arrangements, the way I see it is that, first of all, what I actually talk about most is the institutional structure of liberal democracy. You see, I despise liberalism. This is very important to understand when I say liberal democracy and so on. Unlike most people who think very highly of liberalism, I don't. So liberal democracy, what I am arguing is that the far right can take hold of all the institutions of liberal democracy, including the highest judiciary, the Supreme Court. Again, if you control the Supreme Court, whose job it is to interpret the Constitution, there's a lot of leeway in that interpretation to interpret the laws and the Constitution. That's one thing. The other thing is that what I'm talking about is institutional structure. You can have a constitution. You can amend it. You can amend it again and again and again and bring it much closer to your ideological political positions. But you still have a constitution. which then, according to liberalism, everything's fine. Liberal structure is there because the constitution is there, and it has been amended according to the procedures of liberal democracy through parliament, this, that, and the other. You have the parliament, you have this. So the whole structure stands. And this is something very, very important. Again, the context of this, this thinking on my part is constant discussion in India and in not only in India, everywhere. Fascism is coming. Fundamental to fascism is the destruction of the liberal democratic structure. What we are witnessing, not only in India, but as I have said in the book, in the United States, in Turkey, not only backward, forward, advanced countries, Hungary, Poland, soon enough probably in France, extreme right rising to power, changing the very structure of society, of ideology, of what Gramsci called the common sense. Hindutva becomes the common sense without any change in the liberal constitutional structure. Islamism can be imposed in Turkey over a period of 10 years and so on by this Muslim Brotherhood, which has come to power, without abolishing the fundamental constitutional structure of liberal democracy. I absolutely insist that the reason why fascism had to abolish liberal democracy is that there was a threat of communist revolution. If you don't have that threat, if you're not facing with that threat, they needed to destroy liberal institutions so that the line between legal and illegal was not something they wanted to observe, and so that all kinds of violence could be unleashed. If you don't have that, then there is no structural compulsion for you to destroy the liberal democratic structure. If Hindutva can become the common sense of the great masses, of the great majority of India, including the lower castes, as Lenin said, there's no great wall of China between the beliefs of the bourgeoisie and the beliefs of the working class. The great success of Subhashini recalled that line from my book, that when I looked at that destruction of the Babri Masjid, the first question for me was, who are these people? What classes do they come from? The great popular, the great masses for the RSS are recruited from the oppressed castes. And if you can have the great majority of Indians slowly and gradually adopted the Hindutva ideology, then you can introduce very, ideas from Manusamriti and so on into your constitution and carry on with your elections and this, that, and the other. So that's actually the institutional structure of liberal democracy. You can have what the very illiberal democracy and so on. So that's one thing I did want to say. About the Hindi translation, and you will do it with my cooperation and so on. No, you should just do it. I don't have to be involved in it at all. Once the book is out, I no longer have any rights on it. LeftWord has some rights on it because they have to sell the book and so on. I no longer have any any control over it. Now it is in the public domain and in the safe hands of comrades. Because comrades are doing it, I'm quite sure they'll do whatever is really right and proper. So you should just go ahead, do it. If you want to shorten it, great. Shorten it. If you want to add some of your own, that too will be just fine. You know? And one last thing, Subhashini. Yes, it is true that my writing in Urdu has carried into my writing in English. My writing in Urdu was both simultaneously, a lot of that writing was for the working class. Even into the peasantry. And some other Urdu writing, which was for the intellectuals and so on. But that original training did give me this commitment that even the most difficult things that I write about, I should write in a language that reasonably literate people can follow. Perhaps not every reference that I would make, not every fact that I would cite, but the prose should be transparent enough for any more or less well-educated person to follow. That is my, that has been my ambition in terms of my writing. I'm very, very grateful for LeftWord to have published this book, to have worked so hard on it. Very grateful to Vijay for having taken so much trouble over this book. And of course, very grateful and happy that both Prakash and Subhashini, I was quite surprised, very happily surprised that the two of you are going to participate in this virtual release. And great pleasure for me.
Thank you very much. I just want to remind our viewers that we do have the book available on our website. If you go to the home page, as you can see, mayday.leftword.com, it's right up there. Both, if you can click on the banner, you'll reach the book page, but also here in the editor's picks. And as I said, we do ship the book all over the world. So that's, I just wanted to show you the home page. With this, over to Vijay.
Okay, it's great to be here. It's a pleasure to share this room with comrades Prakash and Subhashini, our LeftWord leaders, with Aijaz, of course, and Sudhanwa. Both Sudhanwa and I are 53 years old. We were both about 24 years old when the Babri Masjid was destroyed. And I just want to say that in those years, just to echo what Comrade Prakash said, I remember going from maybe the Nehru Memorial Library in those days to JNU, to Delhi University, trying to get as many lectures as I could from Professor Aijaz Ahmad. And then, of course, slowly accumulating, these things, all these books. The essays in Social Scientist, this is from 1993, Culture, Community, Nation on the Ruins of Ayodhya. The essays in EPW. I mean, I just cannot say, I don't actually know how to say this, but that they provided a kind of orientation. Things were very confusing for us, and especially for real nutcases like Sudhu and I, who decided to join the Communist Party when the Soviet Union collapsed. Like, the Soviet Union was collapsing, and Sudhu and I knock on the door and say, please, we would like to join the CPIM. We needed orientation. And when I write in the introduction that Marxists of my generation, our generation, learned a great deal, I mean it. I mean, we found our orientation. And more than anything else, I was used to Marxism before. And what had I think happened, and this is also indicated in this conversation, what we had all seen happen was Marxism had begun to mirror the professionalism and specialization of the academy. So there were economists who were Marxists, and then there were literary critics who were Marxists, and then there were political scientists, and there were neo-Gramscians who talked about hegemony in the political science departments, and then there were debates about the falling rate of profit and the crisis of profitability in economics departments. Admittedly, less and less Marxists in each place, but they had been in a way slotted into their specializations. And when one heard our party leaders talk, they didn't actually talk like that. They talked in a much more holistic way. I'm using holistic deliberately. That's not really the word that I should be using. But for me at the time, I thought, well, they're talking about the whole. They're trying to explain to us what's happening. And then listening to these lectures by Aijaz, where these disciplinary boundaries were not relevant, because after all, what is the pursuit of a Marxist understanding of the world? It's not to understand the tires, the widgets, the steering wheel, the windshield wipers. It's to understand the whole thing. It's to understand the whole. What we know from the tradition is the totality. Is to try to understand the totality, for which you need to know how to explore the economics, for which you have to learn how to explore the politics. You need to understand how to understand culture. You need to be able to do a literary critical analysis of ideology. You need a range of tools. Every tool is necessary to understand the whole. And that was refreshing for me, because after all, we had come to some sense of how to analyze the structure of the social development. We were also learning how to analyze the conjuncture. And I'm using the word learning because in these lectures, in the readings, this was like a master class in Marxism as the pursuit of analyzing the totality, the structure in general, and then the conjunctural moment in particular. The conjuncture as the way the structure shows itself to you. This was a learning in method as much as anything, but also completely refreshing, because now you're not left to that small piece of the professionalized, dividing up of knowledge into these branches, but you could look at the whole, because after all, you can't advance an agenda in history merely from one branch of knowledge. You advance the agenda of history from understanding the whole, and then providing, a sense of strategy that emerges from that understanding of the whole. In the recent period, Ajaz has been writing about, well, let's call it the far right, but it's not really the far right that he's been writing about. He's been writing about the wretchedness of our societies, and what capitalism has done to social life, to culture. It's one thing to calculate deprivation, to provide, as Thomas Piketty does, well, in a most obvious way. I mean, Thomas Piketty, come into my car and let me drive you down the streets of a major city anyway, and we can see social inequality. Do we really need that depth of statistics? What's more important to analyze is everything else that the social inequality provokes from us. Simple questions like, why isn't there a revolt? If there is such vast social inequality, why is there no revolt? Why aren't people on the streets, slitting the throats? We used to say in the old days, how do you pronounce bourgeoisie? Because it's not an easy word to pronounce. And you know how we often confuse bourgeois and bourgeoisie, because God, nobody knows French, and you know. But the answer is you don't pronounce bourgeoisie like the French do. You pronounce bourgeoisie with hatred. That's how you pronounce bourgeoisie. So the question is raised of social inequality, that it's not to calculate better, have a better understanding of what is the perfect model to understand social inequality. The question it provokes is, why isn't there a rising? Why have the objective conditions not produced a certain kind of subjective outcome? Because guess what? If you understand the totality properly, you know that imputed outcome is not necessary, and the analysis of the totality is going to show you something else, which is how wretched life has become, not only because of capitalism, but because of what it has drawn into itself, our pasts. Another thing one often says, look in the United States, they can barely finish the election. If you want to see a doctor, you want a 21st century manual for the doctor. You're doing a heart surgery. I don't want the doctor to open an 18th century manual to do a surgery today. I want them to look at the most current stuff. On the other hand, we're okay with political manuals like a constitution from the 18th century. In India, it might get worse. They're taking lessons from the 12th century BCE. In other words, the Manusmriti. I mean, seriously, don't you need? But maybe if you understand the totality properly, if you try to get into the heart of it, that's a superficial way of seeing things, because you want to understand how social life has been rendered wretched, how the reproduction of caste makes certain things much more difficult to simply conjure out of the economic contradictions. Makes it much harder. You have to actually go straight into the depredations of social life. In other words, if you're not dealing with caste, you can't drive the social and economic contradictions harder. These are the kinds of things that are clarified, that I think being shown by the writings in recent years, and I'm really glad that the last, I don't know, third of the book is an entry into this I don't even, Ajaz, you said I hate liberalism, about the just profoundly the liberalism which is saturated in hypocrisy, and marinated and saturated in hypocrisy, and then around it is the far right, which is not so far from liberalism in so many ways structurally. And I think those writings, that those reflections in this book on those writings, and the writings which we are going to collect into many books to come, which try to explain this, firstly the way in which there's an intimacy between the far right and liberalism, and how they grow on the wretchedness of our social order. I use the word wretchedness a lot because I'm also reflecting on a key phrase for me from Aijaz's writings from 1992 onward, which is cultures of cruelty. A very important phrase that unites a lot of his work. So I mean, I don't want to say more, Sudhu. I just want to say that, you go back to the real old man, old Karl Marx, and in that fantastic preface to 1859, the contribution to the critique of political economy, Marx has this tantalizing line. He writes, the prehistory of human society accordingly closes with this social formation. In other words, everything before the communist revolution is the prehistory. It's a phrase that then Adorno picks up, and so on. Everything before is prehistory. And I mean, in 1859, the old man writes that, and how correct he is. How little my conscience wants to admit that what we're living in is history, when there is such wretchedness in the world. There is such cruelty in the world. I just don't want my conscience to accept that this is what it is. There's a moment where the book ends, and I'm taking the line out of context. There's a way in which the book ends. We're talking about writing and so on, and I say sometimes, the context of the writing doesn't come out in the text and so on. And he says that's how it should be. it's a line that I'm going to really keep close to me, because if anybody has read Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, Vonnegut has a line where he says, many times in the text, he'll say, "So it goes." You know, something happens and then he just says, "So it goes." It's a very interesting reflection on the fact that there's something horrible outside the window, and at this moment, all I can do is indicate that it exists. Um, there is something horrible outside the window where we live. You know, there's something horrible out there, and we have to have the capacity to be moved by that. And I fear we may have the capacity to be moved by that, but once moved, we need to understand it, because we have to change it. It's not something you can come to terms with. I mean, reading this book again with a title that says "Nothing human is alien to me." Nothing human is alien to me because humanity is not here yet. It's our job to produce humanity. It's the sixth thesis, Marxist sixth thesis on Feuerbach. There is no human nature. We're going to make it. So Ajaz, thanks a lot for all these books, all of them and more that we're going to have from you from LeftWord. And for me personally, and I know Sudhu and Mala, this was a real treat. This is one of the most special books I worked on in my life, and I'm really glad that we're celebrating it today. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I just want to, echo again what Vijay said. This is a very special book for us for all kinds of reasons. And I'm also looking forward very much over the next 2 or 3 years to all the other books that I know are waiting to be written. Aijaz has promised us a series of introductions.
They will come. They will come.
So that's wonderful. Looking forward to that. Also looking forward very much to working with Subhashini and other comrades. Sanjay Kundan, our Hindi editor, is also here with him and others on making some of Aijaz's writings more available in Hindi as well, including this book. So yes, with these words, I'm going to close now because we are all in different time zones. And for us in India, it's morning, but for comrades and friends in other parts of the world, these are different times, and we want to let them go. But once again, just to remind all our viewers that this book of Aijaz Ahmad's, as well as the other titles from LeftWord Books and a number of others from independent publishers from India, are available on leftword.com. Do please come to the site. Check us out, buy as much as you can. All of us know that this has been a difficult period for all businesses, and it might seem strange to end this event today with talking about business, but really, sorry?
Capital.
Absolutely. But the production of ideas doesn't really mean very much unless one can also disseminate them, and these ideas reach larger and larger number of people. And for that, these books have to circulate more and more. So I do invite all of you to visit the leftword.com website, check us out there, and do please order. As I've said again and again, we supply books all over the world. But also many of our books are now available as ebooks as well on our own site, so you can also download ebooks. With this, once again, a big thanks to Comrade Prakash Karat, Comrade Subhashini Ali, Vijay, and most of all to Aijaz for all of his thinking, all of his writing, and for helping us navigate this world a little bit better. So hopefully we can change it. Thank you very much.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.